Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today I'll be watching Road to Cannae Chapter 1, Hannibal Part 11 by HistoryMarche. So, last time we saw as Hannibal lured the Romans into another humiliating defeat, and the Roman Senate basically fired Fabius Maximus, their best general. In this video, we are beginning the journey to the Battle of Cannae, Hannibal's most famous victory against the Romans. I'm really excited to get into this one. If you guys end up enjoying this episode, I would appreciate it if you would check out my Patreon, which is linked in the description down below, and will give you access to exclusive reaction content. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this video. Alright, Battle of Cannae Chapter 1. This is the first chapter, by the way, in what is, I believe, a 3-chapter series on the Battle of Cannae, and this will be, presumably, the build-up to that battle.
It is August 2nd, 216 BC. Somewhere in the hills south of the river Aufidius, two figures could be seen, creeping through the undergrowth, surrounded by the sounds of the forest. Accompanied by his father, a young boy was learning to hunt.
Okay, we got some custom art. Looks like they're really putting a lot of resources into this part in particular, which, makes a lot of sense given the significance of this battle and the fame of this battle.
Spotting their prey, the father whispered, "Nature is to be feared as much as it is to be revered, and glory awaits those who temper it. Now you will become a man." As the boy trained his bow, the deer jolted and ran off. The pair looked around to see what startled the animal. As their ears perked up, screams. The sound of screams in the distance caught their attention.
Uh-oh.
To their amazement, just beyond the brush in the plain below, taking place was what seemed like an enormous battle near the town of Cannae.
Wow. We're getting a real, in media res, jump right into it, and I assume we're gonna backtrack and we'll be given the build-up. I like it, it's very entertaining.
I'm happy to say that for this video we partnered up with Backblaze, a secure online backup service that's streamlined for beginners. As their longtime user, Backblaze is my absolute favorite because of their strategy to keep...
And like always, please support the channels that we react to. Their videos are always linked in the description down below. Go check them out, give them a like, check out their sponsor, all that good stuff. This is where we left off last time. Now, not too many changes, frankly, from how the map has been this entire series, but there are some differences. Now, what this map doesn't show is that Hannibal has been on an absolutely insane campaign throughout the Italian peninsula for years at this point. I mean, he's defeated Roman army after Roman army. Now, I guess he hasn't actually captured any territory for Carthage outside of wherever he may be camping at that moment, but we know that's happening. And another change, as we can see if we look westwards towards Hispania or the Iberian Peninsula, is that Rome has been making some progress, particularly a bit north of Saguntum. We know that's an important city in the region. Rome has managed to make a bit of progress, gain a bit of territory, ally with some of the local tribes, particularly led by several members of the Scipio family who are now out westwards in Iberia.
Hannibal, now spending his second winter in Italy, was commanding an undefeated army that inflicted losses on the Romans more severe than those suffered in the First Punic War, destroying several armies, marching across Italy at will, pillaging and setting the rich countryside ablaze.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. The map shows us that, Carthage doesn't hold any territory in the Italian peninsula, and sure, but Hannibal is roaming free throughout the heartland of Rome. He's pillaging countryside, destroying several Roman armies. Most frustratingly to the Roman Senate, he keeps burning down their fancy estates, so he is really just doing whatever he wants.
Seemingly unopposed. Rome's scorched earth tactics of the year prior, intended to starve Hannibal's army, hadn't succeeded. His unchallenged presence in...
Yes, though I'd sort of put an asterisk on that. I think it was a good idea. I think, first off, Fabius didn't get the time that he needed. The Roman Senate would not cooperate, and they got him out of there as soon as they could. Also, got to give some credit to Hannibal. He's a smart guy. But, honestly, I would give more credit, I guess, or more blame for the failure of the Fabian strategy to, I suppose, Roman institutions. The Roman senators, Fabius's fellow generals, really were just not on board, and they didn't want to comply with his strategy. And so, yes, it didn't work out, but I would not necessarily put that on Fabius himself. There were a lot of other factors that have led us to this point. I still think that of the Roman generals we've seen so far, and obviously there's a prominent one who's yet to come, but of the Roman generals we've seen so far in Italy, Fabius has probably done the best job. Not that he's necessarily done amazingly, but if you're ranking them against each other at this point, I would hand command back to Fabius. But of course we know the Senate is not pleased with him, and that's how we ended up in this situation.
Italy was a humiliation for the Republic, and, at least politically, successes in Spain and Sicily were mere consolations. But Fabius's dictatorship, despite failing in its primary objective, provided Rome time to recover and oversaw the rebuilding of the field army, now under temporary command of Servilius and Regulus.
And to be fair, that was probably Fabius's biggest achievement. In the end, the scorched earth strategy didn't necessarily work out for reasons that I've already discussed, but what Fabius did is that he managed to mostly avoid major engagements with Hannibal, and what he really managed to do was avoid another Roman army from being destroyed. This is really why I say Fabius is probably the best that we've seen so far, because all of these other generals and commanders we've seen, get baited in by Hannibal, get defeated extremely badly, and get their armies destroyed. Fabius managed to keep a Roman army in the field. He managed to train up more troops. So even though he didn't get along with the Senate, they had a bad relationship, now that Fabius is gone, the Roman army's probably in a better place than it was before. He's managed to build up its strength a little bit. Let's see if these two can do a better job now that Fabius is gone and he's left them in a bit of a stronger position.
However, feeling the economic impact of Hannibal's operations and fearing defections from its allies, during the winter, the Senate mobilized the Republic's resources. 2 new consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, would hold joint command over the largest army Rome had ever put to field, with troops assembled and trained across Italy over the coming months. As recruits were organized into legions, commanding officers appointed, drills conducted, and oaths taken, a sense of trust developed between the men and their leaders, gradually building a confident and effective force that was grimly determined to destroy the Carthaginian army in Italy in 216 BC.
Alright, we're seeing some names pop up that will play roles in the Battle of Cannae, but we haven't quite got to that yet. So basically, the Republic is continuing doing what it's done, which is Fabius wanted to try a new strategy, don't engage with Hannibal, scorched earth, make sure he can't access any resources, a battle of attrition. The Senate didn't like that. What they've been trying to do this whole time is pour more money, more resources into the problem, charge headfirst. Mobilize more men, get bigger armies, go straight at Hannibal, overwhelm him. That strategy has been terrible so far. Hasn't worked at all. Will it work now? I guess we'll see, but I'm sure many of you know the answer is no.
C. 8 over-strength legions, each numbering 5,000 troops, were raised. 40,000 Roman infantry and 2,400 cavalry would form the core of the massive army.
And, I mean, look, we will see bigger armies in the future of Rome, but this is a pretty gigantic force of men to mobilize, especially at this time.
Along with each legion, there would be an equal number of allied infantry, 40,000 in total, along with around 4,000 cavalry. All told, a host nearly 87,000 strong was assembled.
And they definitely majorly outnumber Hannibal. I mean, he's been outnumbered before, but now it is by a lot.
A third of the Senate would serve in the army for the campaign of 216 BC, while most of the remaining senators sent their sons or relatives to join the legions.
And I think, alongside many other things, this is one of the reasons why this battle is so key, so crucial. Now, if we just think ahead for a little bit, a third of senators join the army, 2/3 of senators send family members to the army, aristocracy joins, experienced tribunes and praetors are appointed. You know, this army is packed with the cream of the crop, some of the most important people from the Republic. Now, if you were to imagine, say, I don't know, an absolutely devastating defeat was to occur, and the vast majority of this army was to be lost, not only would that be a massive loss in resources and manpower, this absolutely gigantic army, but it would be a massive loss of high-level officials, a massive loss of the elite class of Rome. It would be a disaster. So just keep that in mind if, potentially, some sort of disastrous loss was to happen.
A very large number of equestrians, the Roman aristocracy, also joined, and numerous distinguished men served as military tribunes or as war counselors to one of the consuls. Of the appointed tribunes, 4 would go on to become consuls, while 3 out of 4 praetors that were elected that year were all former consuls themselves, with some of them having held field commands in previous wars. These were experienced men who reached maturity in the First Punic War, whose honor and tradition bound them to offer their services to Rome, realizing that the very idea of Roma Eterna was now in jeopardy. For Hannibal, being in hostile territory and supplying an army of some 50,000 soldiers and 10,000 cavalry horses, as well as servants, wives, and camp followers, was a never-ending problem that dictated the activities of a network of foraging parties and movements of the army.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth stating when we were talking about those maps at the beginning of this episode, I was mentioning, those maps don't show everything Hannibal's been up to, but it is true that Carthage doesn't hold territory on the Italian peninsula. And so Hannibal does not have the sort of supply lines I'm sure he would love back to the mainland, or if he was closer to his home base of Hispania, he has to forage for all of his food and his resources, his supplies. So even though he has been in a position of strength, he's been winning battle after battle, and I keep reiterating this because it's absolutely crucial, Hannibal is always in a risky position. He really is. Now maybe there's a tipping point where Hannibal really starts to take over. In the end, that's not going to happen. But at this point, Hannibal does still need to supply all of his people, and he is still in hostile territory. So still a dangerous spot to be in.
But thanks to Hannibal's logistical mindset, enough provisions were gathered at Geronium to last around 6 months, from late autumn 217 until spring of 216 BC. And now the year's crops were ripe enough to be harvested by his troops during campaign season.
Though, Hannibal has been pretty free up until this point to just storm around the countryside, seizing crops, supplies, and resources. So it hasn't been too much. It's been a problem. Keeping your men supplied in a situation like this is always a problem, but Hannibal has managed to do it, and he's managed to do it pretty well so far.
In early June, Hannibal left his winter quarters, descending from the Apennines into the fertile region of Apulia, with the Roman army following at a distance.
All right.
After observing Hannibal's activities for several months, the two temporary consuls were asking for instructions from the Senate, now that the Carthaginians were on the move again, explaining that staying close to the enemy could force them into a battle. The Senate instructed them to wait until consuls Paulus and Varro arrived with their legions.
And I will say, even this is a bit more caution than we've seen from some Roman generals. You might think of Minucius. We've seen some of these guys just totally run right in there without waiting for help or assistance. Though I'm sure part of that is due to the enormity of the army that they've gathered. They want to make sure, because clearly everything's gearing towards a major confrontation with Hannibal. I'm sure Hannibal knows that. The Romans certainly know that. That's what they're planning for. And so they want to make sure everything's right. They are ready to do this.
This allowed the Carthaginian army to pillage their way through Apulia. For a third year in a row, Hannibal continued his campaign of violence to demonstrate Rome's inability to defend itself and its allies, in the hope that the continued perception of the Republic's weakness would cause defections and rebellions among its allies in southern Italy.
Yep, he's still at it, though he hasn't seen too much success anywhere aside from the Po Valley, right up north. He hasn't seen too much success stealing allies from Rome throughout the rest of the Italian peninsula yet, but, you can imagine, perhaps, if Rome stays in this weakened position, maybe Hannibal can manage to pull off certain peoples, groups, and tribes who may be willing to help him out a little bit. Because, I know it sounds crazy to say, because we really are in sort of the heart of Rome. When you think about Roman history more broadly, you might think, oh, the heart, the Italian peninsula, of course. But even at this point, it hasn't been too long since the Romans, went up and down the peninsula conquering territory. Remember, it all starts from Rome, and they move out from there. So it isn't insane to think that some of these conquered peoples throughout the Italian peninsula might still remember that, and might still be somewhat willing, if Rome is weakened enough, to go over to the other side. Now, there are certainly a lot of loyal peoples throughout the Italian peninsula at this point, but there are some who are definitely not so loyal.
Therefore, seeking a decisive battle against Hannibal was a logical decision for the Romans. Prior defeats had not yet diminished their spirit, and their resources were sufficient to continue the war.
Jeez. And already that's pretty impressive. The Romans' determination to keep going, and really, in the end, we're a while from the end of this war, but that is what's going to push them through the Second Punic War. That's what pushed them through the First Punic War, is that Roman martial spirit, that Roman determination to keep going, whatever the cost. That is what is going to lead them to victory eventually in this conflict, but we are still a long while from that.
On joining the two temporary consuls, Paulus and Varro led the combined force south along the coastal plain to confront Hannibal. The two Roman commanders carefully scouted the route ahead, with riders patrolling the open country north of the river Aufidius to ensure that no ambush against them could succeed. But the Romans too faced logistical challenges. Supplying 87,000 men, their mounts and pack animals, was immensely problematic.
Yeah, and that makes me think, first off, Hannibal had, I believe it was around 50,000 men, so you can imagine how difficult it was to supply them. But even the Romans, this is their territory, they have supply lines, but this large of an army, you got to imagine the logistics of that. It is incredibly difficult to get enough resources, supplies, food, pack animals, horses, etc., 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 to keep an army that big moving.
And maneuvering a force of that size in close vicinity of the enemy presented further challenges.
Right.
The clouds of dust thrown up by the massive marching column was visible up to 10 kilometers away. Meanwhile, after raiding Apulia for about 7 weeks, Hannibal was considering his next move.
Yeah. I mean, Hannibal's a smart guy, and he's been winning all these battles, but he does have to be careful. Not only, once again, is he in enemy territory, supplies can be a problem, but he has this absolutely gigantic army bearing down on him. He has to be careful with his next move.
Scouts must have informed him of the large force he would have to face, and he knew that a Roman victory in a single battle could stop his invasion and end any hopes of winning the war.
Yeah. This is an absolutely key point that I want to highlight. That is so important. You know, Hannibal has been winning battle after battle after battle. All it takes really is one defeat for Hannibal. Like, if the Romans can deal Hannibal a defeat as devastating as he routinely deals them, he's done for. I mean, he'll be left with a small army struggling in the Italian peninsula. Carthage probably can't afford to give him the sort of support he would need to rebuild. Not to say he would be instantly done or he would have to instantly flee. I don't know exactly what would happen. But basically, one devastating loss for Hannibal would be incredibly, incredibly bad. And that's all it would take. So he has to be way more careful than the Romans do. He has to make sure to avoid that. Just in the position they're in, they can afford to take way more losses than he can. Easily.
Without any allies in southern Italy, if his army was dealt even a limited defeat, it would have been difficult for it to survive. Too far from its bases in Spain and the tribes of Cisalpine Gaul, where supplies could be drawn from.
Yep, that's exactly the point I'm making. Not to say he would be instantly done for, but think of how much harder it would be to keep up the battles, to keep supplied. You know, everything would get a lot more difficult.
Any significant losses of men in battle couldn't be replaced, and would diminish Hannibal's ability to plunder the countryside and wage war on the Romans.
Yeah.
This would have resulted in lower rations and lack of payment for the troops, which would have certainly caused some of the contingents to lose heart and desert.
Yeah, I mean, look, Hannibal has some troops who have been with him the whole way. He has some loyal North African cavalry. He has some cavalry and troops from Iberia. You know, these Carthaginians, in one way or another, or sort of allied Carthaginian, whatever, who have been with him throughout this whole struggle. And they're loyal. These people will be loyal to the end, but he has an army of tens of thousands. He's picked up a lot of allies along the way. A lot of tribes he's passed by, a lot of other peoples, and a lot of these allies are not nearly as loyal as the diehards will be. And so, if the pay starts to disappear, or the food starts to dry up, or it looks like the momentum is shifting, they'll probably head back home. You know, so there's a sizable contingent of Hannibal's army who will not stick with him through thick or thin. Now, like I said, there are some of those die-hard loyalists who would absolutely stay with Hannibal till the end of the earth. I mean, they have been with him through so much, but there's a lot who won't.
Another rumor circled in Rome that Hannibal drew up a contingency plan, in case of defeat, to abandon the army and flee north with his cavalry, in the hope of cutting his way to Cisalpine Gaul. Whether or not this was true is impossible to say, but by mid-July, Hannibal captured the town of Cannae.
Okay.
While it wasn't the wealthiest nor largest settlement in the area, and was now abandoned, having suffered in the last year's campaign, Cannae was used by the Roman army as a supply depot. Capturing it, along with gathering the produce from the surrounding area, secured plentiful provisions for the troops, which reduced the need to forage for some time. For the next several weeks, the Carthaginian general sat and waited for the Romans. Situated on a hilltop, Cannae was a good vantage point, overlooking the flat plain in the direction from which the Roman army would come.
I mean, this is what Hannibal does best. He takes a position, he waits for the Romans to come, he draws them in, and then he springs some sort of trap or scheme on them. Can he do it this time? This is at an almost unimaginable scale, a much larger scale than he's dealt with before. Will the same idea work again?
One of the Carthaginian officers by the name of Gisgo nervously commented on the size of the enemy army. Undoubtedly, he wasn't the only one in the Carthaginian army that was intimidated by the size of the Roman host.
Surely.
But, ever the master of mind games, Hannibal wittily remarked, "The thing that has escaped your notice is that, although there are so many of them, there is not one among them called Gisgo," thereby bolstering the confidence of the men and...
Dude, Hannibal's so good. I mean, we've seen all the mind games he plays with the Romans, with his enemies. He can read them so well. That's such a good response, though, because it tells his men, let's say Gisgo in particular, one, they might have a lot, but they are not the quality, the value of the men we have here. Two, he's also buttering up his men, particularly this fella Gisgo. He's saying, look, you guys are where it's at. They don't have anyone like you. And, the Carthaginians say, you know what, he's right. We're hearing it from Hannibal. He's boosting our confidence. Hannibal's just great at this kind of stuff. He's a great leader.
Diffusing the tension into laughter. Although there was nothing stopping the Carthaginian general from continuing south, where more plunder could have been taken, he was aware that the Romans were coming and that he could not be perceived as trying to avoid battle, for no community in southern Italy would defect to his side if he lacked confidence in defeating Rome.
Yeah.
At Cannae, Hannibal's objective was to meet and destroy the Romans.
Oh my. Yeah. Zoom, enhance. Alright. That was a great build-up to the battle, by the way. It really showed us why this battle is important, what is at stake. Really, a lot is at stake. The Romans have developed this massive, massive army, and Hannibal really needs a pretty unlikely victory in order to successfully continue his campaign, to build support throughout the Italian peninsula. So it's a real high-stakes battle, and I'm very excited to see the next 2 episodes of this series, which will be on the Battle of Cannae. Such an important battle, one that's been remembered throughout history since then. And I think these episodes will be very entertaining. So hey, stick around if you want to see them. Subscribe, hit that bell button. You'll be notified when I release any new videos. Stay tuned. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. Leave a comment if you have anything to comment about, and please check out the Patreon. All that good stuff. Now, I hope you guys are having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.